Are you ready to explore Las Cruces? I'm Bud Russo.
And I'm Cheryl Falstead, and we'll be your guides. You know, Bud, one of the things that intrigues people who are new to this area is the references to the Bataan Death March. At Veterans Memorial Park on Roadrunner Parkway on the east side of town, there is a larger-than-life statue created by local artist Kelly Hester that represents 3 soldiers helping each other on the 60-mile march. It is the only federally funded monument dedicated to the victims of Bataan. Along Highway 70, the frontage roads are called Bataan Memorial East and West. People wonder why Bataan is so important to Las Crucens.
To understand that, you need to know something about the history of Bataan. Before World War II, the Philippines were considered to be a plum assignment for military personnel. Women in the military took their finest dresses for the balls that were held there in the lovely tropical surroundings. But while we remember clearly that Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7th, we don't often recall that just across the international date line, on December 8, the Philippines were also attacked.
The U.S. had thousands of personnel on this island, but we weren't at war in the Pacific, and they were not armed with the latest equipment or much of it. Rations and medical supplies quickly were in short supply as well. They were certainly not prepared for an all-out war that would last for months. As the days drug on, the soldiers had to cut their meal rations by half, then by 3/4, until many of the men were not only weak from hunger and malnutrition, but had come down with diseases such as the debilitating beriberi and malaria. But those who could fought on.
Finally, President Roosevelt ordered General Douglas MacArthur to leave the Philippines for his own safety, prompting MacArthur's famous quote, "I came out of Bataan, and I will return." You know, most folks don't know that MacArthur lived in New Mexico as a boy while his father commanded army posts, such as Fort Selden. Not long after MacArthur left, our soldiers were ordered to surrender to the Japanese. Sick, outgunned, and dispirited, most of the over 11,000 Americans reported as ordered to their victors, along with about 16,000 Filipino comrades. The Japanese were overwhelmed with the number of men they were suddenly responsible for. Their views about dealing with captives differed quite strongly from the Americans. The Japanese considered surrendering to be dishonorable and treated their captives with disdain.
And with cruelty. These exhausted, sick, and famished men were set off on a forced march in the punishing tropical heat from the southern portion of the island towards Camp O'Donnell further north. They were denied food and water, sometimes marching for an entire day with only a handful of rice for nourishment, and often not even that. Men who tried to drink from puddles on the road or eat food offered by civilians were shot or bayoneted. Soldiers trying to help their comrades were also often killed for their acts of kindness.
They were marched until they reached a railroad siding, where they were packed into stifling rail cars without food or water, then more marching until they reached Camp O'Donnell. Their suffering did not end there. Disease was rampant, food was in short supply, and their captors were consistent in their cruelty. Some men were sent to work in the fields, and others on burial duty. Thousands were later sent on hell ships to serve as slave labor in China or Japan. The ships were not marked as either POW transports or hospital ships, and were often bombed by U.S. planes and ships, not knowing their comrades were inside.
There are no exact numbers, but it is estimated that of the over 11,000 U.S. soldiers serving in the Philippines before the war, only half ever made it home. And why do New Mexico and Las Cruces remember Bataan so well? The 200th Coast Artillery of the New Mexico National Guard was there, and of the over 1,800 men who went to the Philippines, only about 900 ever returned home. For a sparsely populated state, this was an enormous loss. The pain is still raw, and in 1989, a local group of Army ROTC students decided to hold a march in honor of those who died and those who survived. The Bataan Memorial Death March is held each year at White Sands Missile Range and attracts thousands of military and civilian participants from across the U.S. and around the world. They can choose to do a punishing 26.2-mile marathon or a shorter but still challenging 15-mile course. It is known as one of the most difficult marathons in the United States.
A very special part of the event is the opportunity to meet Bataan survivors. On Saturday, the day before the march, Survivors tell rapt audiences about their experiences. Then Sunday morning, during the pre-dawn opening ceremony, they are honored in front of the thousands of marchers. As the marchers make their way through the start chute, they have the opportunity to shake the hands of these resilient veterans.
These survivors are now in their 80s and 90s and won't be with us much longer. I encourage those who are in Las Cruces the weekend of the march to come out to meet these remarkable men and hear their stories. If you are up to a challenge, sign up for the march or offer to volunteer at an aid station. Or just go out and cheer for the marchers along the side of the trail. Your support truly helps keep them going. You can get more information at www.batanmarch.com.
So now you know why Las Crucens honor those brave men. When you see the statue at Veterans Park or drive on Bataan Memorial Highway, take a moment to honor them too. I'm Bud Russo.
And I'm Cheryl Falstead. We hope you'll enjoy exploring Las Cruces. This podcast was brought to you by the Las Cruces Convention and Visitors Bureau and produced by Explore New Mexico.